The greatest threat to free market capitalism outside that of the US central bank printing money and completely destroying the value of your currency, well, that would be ESG, environmental social governance. This ties in with the nature of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, the Great Reset, central bank digital currencies. It's genuinely a rabbit hole that is unbelievably deep. I will not be able to go into all of it, but I will leave links in the description below to channels that I highly recommend you go and check out if you want to get more information about this. People who are incredibly well versed in these topics. Let's go. From Clint Russell of Liberty Lockdown, there is no free market. There is a central bank. The price of money is manipulated. The quantity of money skyrocketed. Massive regulatory overreach exists. ESG is a cartelization of big business and big government to reshape the world. Not a free market at all. More aptly described as fascism. Yeah, absolutely. If you have the intermingling of government and private corporations to assert top-down regulatory control on the populace, that would be, well, fascism. This is in response to an article from The Hill where it says unchecked growth of ESG investing threatens Americans' trust in the free market. This is absolutely true. It's spot on. We're going to get into this article in just a moment. Let's go ahead and jump into a Twitter thread from James Lindsay. We have a Twitter thread from James Lindsay, and this is on ThreadReader, which just compartmentalizes a massive thread that was put out on Twitter and puts it in article format. God bless whoever made this. I really appreciate you. The other night, at an event in Georgia, I got asked where the courageous CEOs are who are standing up against the woke espionage in the corporate world. It's easy to lay a lot of the blame at the CEOs for risk aversion at the feet of the ESG cartel legitimately, but it's only half the story. It's actually easy enough to explain why, but I'm going to have to back that up for Klaus Schwab's latest WEF manifesto too, The Great Narrative for a Better Future. We'll come back to how this is an organized strategy to control corporations and CEOs after explaining it. And if you want to know more about the nature of something like the Great Reset, Klaus Schwab quite literally wrote a book about it, about how we could take advantage of the COVID-19 pandemic and the tragedy that it brought upon society, and we could use this crisis for the greater good. Shocker. The ESG environment is only half the story for seeming to lack the corporate courage. That's top-down power, and there's a lot of leverage on them from there, to the point where they're tortured but serious argument that playing ESG ball is necessary for fiduciary responsibility. The logic there is that you can't maximize shareholder value, aka fiduciary responsibility, in the ESG economy unless you play ball with ESG. That's obviously cartel logic that operates in a financial racketeering environment that probably is illegal, but it's a lot of leverage. And yes, it's absolutely illegal. The big thing that we need to cover here is that government in itself is the biggest cartel that has ever existed. Taxation is a financial racketeering scheme where they extort you at the barrel of a gun, and if you don't pay them exactly what they deem that you owe, well, they will throw you in a cell and treat you like an animal. The top-down ESG cartel logic is probably actually less influential than the bottom-up time bomb that is unambiguously pushed by Western Maoist social culturist environment that is set up as far so the CEO constraints and behaviors go as follows. CEOs are afraid of their employees more than anyone else. And this comes down to the logic that if you can't fire someone, they don't work for you. You work for them. And you're at the behest of the activist class because so many people have weaponized their effective status in the oppression Olympics so that they can sit there and make their victimhood currency have even greater value. And rather than effectively identifying with the purpose of your own merit, people are identifying with the value that they can bring solely out of extorting something because of arbitrary characteristics that they were granted based on the merit of their birth. I remember a time in history where this was something that was demonized and greatly looked down upon because we were looking down upon people for doing this to others. Go ahead and rack your brain and figure out what I'm thinking about. It says, I want to clarify that this isn't just HR doing woke HR stuff. Also, it isn't just the exposure of bad jurisprudence on civil rights law establishments for them, though both of these matter. The real fear is internal employee mutiny that can make daily operations virtually impossible. Mutinous employees not only create challenging and ineffective work environments, but can grind operations effectively toward a halt, and they will also betray you. Remember Maoism. They can leak secrets or wild allegations to hostile media, for example. Why should CEOs fear the employees, though? Here's how it works. Here's how the power of American Maoism is structured. Your company becomes a target for the woke eye of Sauron for whatever reason, and the media starts doing stories to expose you and put pressure on you. This can be bad. The main target of this relentless bad PR propaganda against you and from the media isn't you or even customers from them, though. It's your employees, their friends, and their families. They want people in their personal lives to shame them for working at your company. You can probably hold out against a lot of external pressure as long as you're internally strong. Even an angry consumer and customer boycott or supplier issues. You cannot weather this storm if you are internally brittle or in turmoil. Shame-filled employees will always give you that. And here's something I want to cover. It says, the main target of this relentless bad PR propaganda against you from the media isn't your own customers, it's your employees, their friends, and the families. They want people in their personal lives to shame them for working at your company. If you have someone in your family or a friend that you know that works at the IRS, shame them. Bully them. That's exactly what you should be doing. I will die on that hill. Moving on. By mobilizing the propaganda media, which is very much like being in the beam of the eye of Sauron against what we see is against your company, some of your employees will feel ashamed, and others will report getting immense pressure from their friends and families to quit or else. The infectious dynamic of the struggle session is now operant against your company, and what we see is the media hammer from that outside. The bad pressure puts you and your employees in a position of shame for working for you, especially with their closest personal relationships. They pass that on to you. The struggle session pressure builds up internally from them, forcing you in a non-win situation in which you have to do something to try and alleviate the pressure, but anything you will do will be taken by the propaganda machine as a confession and increase of the struggle session. And that's absolutely true. This is exactly the example of what happens when you give them an inch, they will take a mile. If you admit to something that you have done, when you've done nothing wrong solely because you've been bullied into the process of wanting to apologize because you don't want to look like the bad person, well, you've just admitted your own guilt. That's all they see. They don't care about the fact that you're simply trying to acquiesce and make sure that people know that you're not a bad person and you mean well and you have nobility in your heart. That's irrelevant. That doesn't matter. All they see is an admission of guilt. As pressure mounts from the outside and discord grows internally, your institution is put up in a situation it can scarcely survive. So long as the Maoist false morality rules of the social environment continue, they can use the propaganda media like the Death Star beam to blow up your organization. But this nasty weapon isn't just happening. The left bosses understand it. This is stakeholder capitalism. And this is a quote. But they'll, quote, businesses, be forced to commit to ESG, and ultimately all the commitments will be put to the test by government actions and social pressures. It is about top-down pressure and bottom-up. And this is what we would call a squeeze for those who are not informed, and realistically, I'm not even that informed on this. I love to go to people like Clint from Liberty Lockdown, people like Patrick Bet-David from Valuetainment, people like James Lindsay to talk about these things, because this is something that I'm informed on, but it's not something that I have an in-depth knowledge to understand. I can just see that it is a danger, therefore I will read about it. But I'm not really informed on the nature of what has created the initial structure that has given the foundation for ESG and its front running. Even in the process of reading Klaus Schwab's book, The Great Reset, I didn't even find anything like that. But I'm sure there will be books and things coming out soon that will talk about this. Let's go ahead and get into the rest of what we have here. Let's get into the article from The Hill. We have a piece from The Hill, and it's from Representative Andy Barr of Kentucky. Unchecked growth of ESG investing threatens Americans' trust in the free market. Yeah, it absolutely does. In recent years, a worrisome trend has gripped our nation's capital markets: the proliferation of environmental social governance criteria in investment decisions. While it is well-intentioned in concept, no it isn't, ESG investments are less diversified, have higher fees and lower returns, and have been hijacked by a small group of liberal elites with their own ideological agendas, thereby undermining the fundamental purpose of our capital markets and discriminating against American fossil fuel companies and other politically unfavorable industries. This is absolutely true. ESG applies to the nature of what you see with the climate agenda as well. This trend also threatens transparency and financial agency for millions of hardworking Americans when it comes to their investments and retirement security. Our financial services industry should serve everyone, not just those who agree with the leftist agenda of certain Wall Street elites. The insidious nature of ESG means that the savings and pension funds of ordinary citizens can be leveraged to support policies which they may fundamentally disagree with. Our goals have been clear: to ensure the capital markets serve their true purpose, which is facilitating the efficient allocation of capital to its most productive uses and protecting retail investors from sponsors who place political and social agendas ahead of shareholder interests. And what we see now is, as I've mentioned before, is it's going from shareholder interest to stakeholder interest. And this will be the abandonment even further of the middle and lower class, which will only lead to effectively them becoming ever more poor. Rep. Andy Barr, Ensuring Sound Guidance Act, will just do this. The bill will restore accountability and transparency in our financial services sector and counteract manipulation of capital markets by liberal ideologies. It encourages fiscal responsibility and strategic investment instead of succumbing to the pressures of politically driven reforms. It is a barricade against the left's policies that seek to prioritize ESG investing, erode free market capitalism, and disenfranchise shareholders and retail investors. And this is the big one that needs to be protected, and this is who's at danger here: the retail investor. To this end, West Virginia Treasurer Riley Moore has worked tirelessly with the state lawmakers to pass the House Bill 2862. This new law mandates that proxy votes tied to West Virginia's pension funds can be cast solely on the basis of the best financial interest of the pension fund beneficiaries. This new law will safeguard West Virginia's pensions from money managers who wish to leverage their retirement funds to promote political causes instead of financial returns. And here's the deal. Here's actually something interesting that we need to cover about what we just talked about. If they're incentivized so heavily to operate under the ESG metric, otherwise they will lose money and they won't be operating in their fiduciary responsibility. What if they have to do these things, even if these people don't want it? Therefore, they're still meeting their fiduciary responsibility, but these people are completely unaware of why their investments are happening. It's simply because they're still making profit. So, there are still workarounds for this. Don't think this is a catch-all that government's just figured it out. Government will never be the answer for this. The private sector will. Our combined efforts aim to push back against activist asset managers who have weaponized their investing power to advance a narrow politicized worldview using other people's money. ESG's unchecked growth threatens the integrity of our financial services industry and the trust Americans place in the free market. We believe it is time to root out this cancer in our economy and restore freedom in our markets. It is our duty to protect the financial futures of constituents and to ensure that our economy promotes the productivity, efficiency, and diversity in our great nation's industries. Let's put an end to this manipulation of our capital markets and return them to their rightful purpose. Not bad. Not bad at all. Gonna have to fully agree. We're gonna go ahead and get in. It says the press release, Barr and Allen introduced ESG Act to protect investors and preserve access to capital for energy producers. I will not be going through the entire bill. I will go through roughly the first two chapters. Today, U.S. Congressman Andy Barr and Rick Allen reintroduced the Ensuring Sound Guidance Act to protect retail investors' retirement investments account from asset management who would put environmental and social goals ahead of returns. And again, as I've stated, we don't even know if putting environmental social goals will put them ahead of their returns, because many a times they're incentivized to the point where they have no option, because that was how they will make their financial returns. Moving on. The legislation would require investment advisors at the ERISA retirement plan sponsors to prioritize financial returns over non-pecuniary factors when making investment decisions on behalf of their clients. Okay. It says asset managers should be in business of maximizing returns for investors, not pushing their own political agenda at the expense of everyday Americans. Our proposed legislation safeguards savings efforts for hardworking Americans. The critical legislation not only guarantees that advisors make prudent investment choices based on financial factors, but also empowers savers to decide how their money is invested, contrary to the Department of Labor's finalized rule. We must take this significant action to protect retail investors and retirees from the cancer within our capital markets that is ESG, which prioritizes higher fees, less diversified, and lower return investments. Man, I gotta give him a real pat on the back for straight up calling out the fact that ESG is a cancer on free markets. Phenomenally well done. Moving on to the World Economic Forum, the people who are pushing and purporting ESG. It says, yes, ESG is complicated. Together we can simplify it. I will not be going into this article. I will leave it linked in the description below if you yourself would like to go into it. This is something that I read a while back. I remember I saw this when this was going through the COVID pandemic, and they were starting to enforce people with these top-down restrictions, and they're basically saying, well, if you don't enforce mask mandates or vaccine mandates, you're not going to be getting proper funding. And I was like, well, I wonder where this is coming from. And where it was coming from was ESG. Moving on to another thing from the World Economic Forum, here's why we must not lose sight of the importance of ESG despite the recent backlash. I hope the backlash continues and escalates to scales that are completely unknown and unseen, and something that we saw what happened with something like Bud Light. The example of what happened with Bud Light and Target is a perfect representation of ESG galvanizing a business that their customers did not want any of what was being pushed. Bud Light lost billions. Target lost billions. And what we see is, all the World Economic Forum has to say is, here's why we must not lose sight of the importance of ESG. Well, what if the consumers don't want it? I don't think they really care, considering they're trying to convert the value of the market to be seen from that of what the consumer wants to that of what the stakeholder wants. That's all I've got for this. Everything will be linked in the description down below as per usual. Thanks for watching. Give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, a thumbs down if you didn't. Tell me where I'm wrong in the comment section down below. Stay lovely, stay great. Peace out.